In the early 1990s, Phoenix, Arizona was experiencing a period of rapid growth and transformation. The metro area's population was approaching 3 million residents, and the sprawling desert city was becoming a major Sunbelt destination. The Arizona Canal, a historic waterway that winds through the northern portions of Phoenix, had become a popular recreational feature, with bike paths and walking trails that offered residents a respite from urban life. Young professionals jogged along its banks at golden hour, families cycled together on weekend mornings, and the paths felt safe and welcoming. But in the span of less than a year, two brutal murders along these paths would shatter that sense of security and create a mystery that would haunt Phoenix for more than 2 decades before science and determination finally brought a killer to justice. Bryan Patrick Miller was born in 1972 and grew up in the Phoenix area. From an early age, there were warning signs that something was profoundly wrong. Miller would later claim that his childhood was marked by severe abuse, particularly from his mother, and defense experts would argue that this abuse fractured his developing psyche in ways that created what they called dissociative amnesia, a condition where traumatic experiences cause a person to lose conscious memory of their actions during violent episodes. Whether or not this condition actually existed in Miller's case would become a central question at trial. But what is indisputable is that Miller's violent behavior began manifesting when he was still a child. In fall 1989, when Miller was just 15 years old, he approached a woman walking through the parking lot of a Phoenix mall and plunged a knife into her back before fleeing. The victim survived, and a doctor later noted that had Miller angled the blade slightly differently, he could have severed her spine or punctured a vital organ. Miller pleaded guilty to second-degree attempted murder in that case. This early violent assault demonstrated a pattern that would repeat itself: ambush-style attacks on women, stabbing from behind, and a level of violence that suggested not rage or passion, but something colder and more calculated. On November 8, 1992, 21-year-old Angela Brosso was taking advantage of beautiful weather to go for her evening bike ride along the Arizona Canal. Brosso was a tech worker who had recently moved to Phoenix, and friends described her routine of riding at golden hour at sunset, the perfect time to enjoy Arizona's famous skies. She never returned home. Days passed with no sign of her until her body was discovered in a field near the bike path adjacent to the canal. She had been decapitated, and her torso showed evidence of an attempt to cut her completely in half. The brutality was shocking even to experienced homicide detectives. 11 days later, Angela's head was found in the canal. Investigators noted that despite being submerged for days, the head was in remarkably good condition, leading them to suspect the killer might have kept it refrigerated before disposing of it, as if it were some kind of trophy or memento. Angela's purple mountain bike was missing. She had been sexually assaulted, and DNA evidence was collected. But in 1992, DNA databases were in their infancy, and there was no match. The case went quiet. 10 months later, in September 1993, 17-year-old Melanie Bernas broke her curfew. The Arcadia High School student had gone out for an evening bike ride while her mother Marlene was at dinner. When Marlene returned home, Melanie and her bike were gone. The next morning, a woman named Charlotte Pottle was riding her bike with her daughter in a seat behind her when she rode through what appeared to be a strange-looking puddle. She circled back to investigate and realized it was blood. She followed drag marks and called police. When officers arrived, they found Melanie's body floating in the Arizona Canal, dressed in a blue bodysuit. She had been fatally stabbed in the back and sexually assaulted. Disturbingly, letters had been carved into her body. DNA evidence was collected, and when analyzed, it matched the DNA from Angela Brosso's murder. Phoenix now knew it had a serial killer targeting young women on bike paths along the canal. The murders of Angela Brosso and Melanie Bernas created a fear in Phoenix that lasted for an entire generation. Parents stopped letting their children out after sunset. The canal paths, once beloved recreational spaces, became places of dread. Local reporters covered the case extensively, and investigators noted that the initial stab wounds to the backs of both women were so precise and fatal that they suspected the killer might have medical training, perhaps even a surgeon. But despite collecting matching DNA from both victims, despite the intense media coverage and public pressure, the case went cold. There were no solid leads. 20 years passed. In 2014, Phoenix police cold case detectives attended a DNA conference where they learned about advances in forensic genealogy. Detective Clark Schwarzkopf sent DNA information from the Canal murders to Colleen Fitzpatrick's company, Identifinders International, which had developed software capable of mining public genealogy databases to search for familial matches to crime scene DNA. The technology worked. Fitzpatrick's analysis narrowed the suspect pool to individuals with the surname Miller. Schwarzkopf cross-referenced this with his existing list of potential suspects and found 6 people named Miller. One name stood out: Bryan Patrick Miller, a 42-year-old man with a juvenile record for the 1989 stabbing of a woman in a mall parking lot. By 2014, Miller had constructed an entirely new identity for himself. He was known throughout Phoenix as the Zombie Hunter, a steampunk enthusiast who attended comic conventions and public events dressed in an elaborate costume featuring a helmet, goggles, mask, and fake Gatling gun. He drove a modified police car decorated with splattered fake blood and became something of a local celebrity, taking photos with fans and even with police officers who had no idea they were posing with a suspected murderer. Miller later said this costume persona helped him feel less invisible to the world. He worked at an Amazon warehouse, had married in the late 1990s, had a daughter born in 2000, and divorced in 2006. To casual observers, he seemed like an eccentric but harmless hobbyist. Schwarzkopf began conducting surveillance on Miller, observing him during work breaks. To obtain a DNA sample for comparison without alerting Miller, Schwarzkopf devised a ruse. He approached Miller's car during a break, introduced himself, and offered what he described as a job proposal. Schwarzkopf arranged to meet Miller at a Chili's restaurant in Phoenix. Working with the restaurant manager, cold case detectives ensured that Miller's silverware and dishes were pulled directly from the dishwasher and placed at an isolated booth to avoid contamination. Miller arrived with his 15-year-old daughter, which surprised investigators. He ordered a hamburger and water, and when he took a drink, Schwarzkopf knew he had his DNA sample. After observing Miller's mild temperament and his rapport with his daughter, Schwarzkopf doubted this man could be responsible for the brutal Canal murders. But the DNA told a different story. The sample matched perfectly. On January 13, 2015, more than 22 years after the murders, Bryan Patrick Miller was arrested. He denied any involvement in the killings. When his case finally went to trial, Miller waived his right to a jury and chose to be tried by judge alone. His defense team argued that he suffered from dissociative amnesia caused by childhood trauma, claiming he genuinely could not remember committing the murders. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence: the DNA match, testimony about the 1989 stabbing, and evidence that Miller lived in the vicinity of both murders and regularly rode his bike on the canal paths. In April 2023, Miller was convicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder, attempted sexual assault, and kidnapping. On June 7, 2023, he was sentenced to death for both murders. The Bryan Patrick Miller case represents a critical chapter in the evolution of criminal justice. It demonstrated how advances in forensic genealogy could crack cold cases that seemed unsolvable using traditional methods. It also revealed the limitations of early DNA technology and showed why persistence in maintaining evidence and revisiting cold cases remains essential. Miller is also suspected but not charged in the 1992 disappearance of 13-year-old Brandy Myers, whom he allegedly confessed to his ex-wife about abducting and dismembering. Phoenix police recommended murder charges, but prosecutors declined to pursue them without physical evidence. Under Arizona law, Miller's death sentence triggers an automatic appeal, and he currently sits on death row at the Arizona State Prison Complex in Tucson. For the families of Angela Brosso and Melanie Bernas, the conviction brought some measure of justice, though, as Melanie's friend noted, it doesn't make anything easier. The Canal murders remain a permanent reminder that predators can hide behind the most ordinary facades, that evil can wear a costume and pose for photos with fans, and that sometimes justice takes decades to arrive, sustained only by the determination of investigators who refuse to let victims be forgotten.